ICE's violent sweeps in Minneapolis have targeted American citizens. This racial profiling is a perfect example of why ICE's reign of terror on American streets threatens everyone. My name is Kat Tenbarge. I'm an independent journalist partnering with COURIER, and you can also find me at spitfirenews.com. This reporter, Susan Dew, reports that tribal leaders say ICE is detaining American Indians during immigration sweeps. Now, according to tribal attorneys for the Oglala Sioux tribe, ICE detained 4 homeless men who had been living under a bridge in Minneapolis. Some of those men were members of the tribe. Approximately 50,000 American Indians live in the Twin Cities, making it one of the nation's largest urban native hubs. The Franklin Avenue corridor in Minneapolis is an American Indian cultural district and home of the Minneapolis American Indian Center. This is a quote from the Red Lake Nation Secretary Sam Strong. There's a lot of fear that has come out of these situations where, because our people are brown skinned, they're being questioned. And undoubtedly, it's racism. The first people of Minnesota are being detained for being immigrants. I mean, just on its face, it's so wrong. Now, I don't need to explain to you how ridiculous this is, but let's just lay out the facts. These are people who have been in America since well before we called it the United States of America. There is no reason why immigrations and customs enforcement agents should be taking these people away, apart from the color of their skin and the obvious racial profiling that is playing a massive role in this sort of reign of terror. The violence that we're seeing in these video clips, these sweeps and raids where they just appear to be randomly targeting people, whether they're a citizen or not, this is the result of not actually having a strategic plan in place and just wanting to sow terror, particularly in a place like Minneapolis. So, this is a video captured by a reporter for NPR News, another one of those great local outlets.
I'm autistic and I have a brain injury. Put me down. I was just trying to get to the doctor and I'm autistic. It takes me a second to understand. Step back! Step back!
You three fucking human beings? What the fuck that? You fucking piece of shit!
This is absolutely sickening and terrifying to watch. And as this woman explained, before these agents carried her, ripped her out of her car, and carried her down the street, she was just on her way to a doctor's appointment. She's also disabled and needs accommodations that people in ICE custody have not been receiving. This lack of urgent medical care has contributed to illness, disability, and even death in ICE custody. When people are seeing footage like this woman being carried away while screaming, they're understandably extremely upset. There's so much animosity and negative sentiment on the rise toward ICE because of what's happening in Minneapolis. We're even seeing people who supported Trump in the past come to speak out against this because it's so visceral and so obviously wrong. One of those people who's surprisingly starting to speak out about this is the podcast host Joe Rogan.
And then I can also see the point of view of the people that say, yeah, but you don't want militarized people in the streets just roaming around, snatching people up, many of which turn out to actually be U.S. citizens that just don't have their papers on them. Are we really going to be the Gestapo? Where's your papers? Is that what we've come to? So it's more complicated than I think people want to admit. You know, people want to look at this as a black and white issue, you know, if you're a compassionate person or if you're a pragmatic person. And I don't think that's true. I think it's both.
So when it comes to Joe Rogan appearing to backtrack on this, it's a little too late. Joe Rogan being one of the most influential podcasters in the space, especially for young listeners and especially for people whose media diets are more focused in these new media spaces like podcasts and YouTube, he was hugely influential in getting Trump elected for a second time. We can't really overstate how big of a role people like Joe Rogan played. When Trump actually took the stage after the election was called, some of his closest allies personally thanked Joe Rogan and other podcasters in his orbit. Plus, it's not like any of what ICE is doing now was going to be a secret. Trump ran on these mass deportations, and experts and people who had lived through them before, including all of us during Trump's first term, said exactly what this would look like. So Joe Rogan can't claim ignorance. There are no excuses for him choosing to endorse this brutal regime. And now that it's becoming less popular because people are really seeing all of this play out, he's trying to, again, backtrack, but he can't. This is exactly who he supported, and Trump is doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And Joe Rogan, at the exact same time, he's continuing to peddle misinformation about Democrats, continuing to try to make this a both sides issue. Right before he talked about becoming the Gestapo, he talked about the other side of this equation and how people might worry about Democrats coming back into power. But the truth is, when Democrats are in power, they don't act in these authoritarian ways. There's no both sidesing what's happening here. The truth is, there are tens of thousands of ICE agents pouring into American streets looking to attack people at will. The only way we get out of that is by being honest about what this political party has come to represent, and Joe Rogan's not capable of doing that. But his influence is still so enormous. The latest Pew Research indicates that more than half of Americans, all ages, all demographics, are increasingly getting their news from social media. Voices like Joe Rogan's are some of the loudest in this landscape. And when you look at the landscape closer, it shows that conservative media personalities take up the largest slice of the pie by far. Democrats, leftists, and progressives are only starting to sort of open up a window into giving an alternate perspective, one that's more in line with reality. As a journalist, I've watched this shift happen. Particularly, people in my own age range are turning away from traditional mainstream establishments, including mainstream media. And instead, they're getting a lot of their news from social media, from Instagram infographics, from podcasters, and unfortunately, sometimes from people like Joe Rogan. This is a sign that we need more progressives and more people on the other side of the aisle in this online space, informing news audiences and showing them the reality of what's happening on the ground. Otherwise, we'll continue to end up with these both sides fallacies. Contrary to popular belief, ICE does not have the ability to deport people. Deportations are supposed to be the result of a court order after someone is allowed to go through due process. All of this violence that we're seeing unfold on the streets in Minneapolis and elsewhere around the US is extrajudicial. That should mean that these ICE agents would face legal liability for these mistakes that they're making. But the reason that I put mistakes in air quotes is because Trump's administration traffics in this vile white supremacist rhetoric, and these injustices are a direct result of that. When you look at the architects of these deportation plans, this is all part of that equation. And ultimately, there's a case to be made that what's specifically happening in Minneapolis is targeted. Trump and his administration are retaliating against people who don't support them, even if those people are their own constituents. So until ICE's enforcement abilities are curtailed, we're going to keep seeing this happening, even against people who have the greatest right to claim this land. They were here first.